21st Century Radio is sponsored by Hieronymus and Company. Now more of 21st Century Radio with your host, Dr. Zoe Hieronymus.
It's all about soul. It's all about faith and a deeper devotion. It's all about soul. 'Cause under love is a stronger emotion.
Welcome to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronymus. Laura Kortner is our executive producer, and Anita Brockington, our engineer. As the website Shut It Down shares, quote, on October 11, 2016, 5 climate activists who have since become known as the Valve Turners, determined to act commensurately with the truth of unfolding climate cataclysm in the face of the failure of adequate policy, closed safety valves on the 5 pipelines carrying tar sands crude oil into the United States. Their act of climate disobedience shut down 15% of U.S. crude oil imports for nearly a day. The morning of the action, the Valve Turners had sent a letter to President Obama requesting that in keeping with his expressed understanding of the, quote, terrifying, unquote, nature of the climate emergency, he invoked the National Emergencies Act to continue the shutdown of tar sands oil, begin a shutdown of U.S. tar sands and coal extraction, and put before Congress a plan for national mobilization to address the climate emergency. No reply was received. Joining us this hour are Michael Foster and Leonard Higgins. Both are Valve Turners. Michael will give us an update. He joined us last year. Leonard will join us for the first time in a little while, and we'll talk about what activism means and why a new movement entitled Extinction Rebellion is getting so much traction worldwide. Thank you for joining us again, Michael.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me back.
Absolutely. All right. For those who didn't hear our rousing other discussion, describe to us what you did, what happened to you and the other activists, and then maybe you can give us an update of what happened in court, who was acquitted, is anyone in prison, what were the results?
Sure. A few weeks before the election that we all remember, we spread out across the country and shut down all the Canadian tar sands pipelines coming into the U.S., and that amounted to about 2.2 million barrels of oil coming into the country. And we did that by turning off the emergency shutoff valves near the Canadian border in 4 different states. I was in North Dakota, and I waited, as the others did. We waited to be arrested. I waited for about a half an hour, and we wanted to go to court and prove, if possible, that what we did was necessary to prevent a greater harm, that shutting off the pipelines was one of the only things left available to us, because we have tried political solutions, we've tried social solutions, asking people to, shut off the lights and take shorter showers, and everything we've done has led us to a point where we are accelerating the pace of burning fossil fuels and burning the planet at the same moment that we have run out of time for any delay in reducing the amount of fuels that we burn. A drastic reduction is needed. I was part of the group of families that organized to sue Washington State, the children who won the first case where the government was directed by the court to fix climate change for these kids, to come up with a plan in Washington State and make those reductions happen. And we won. It was historic, and nothing happened. And that's one of the things that helped lead me to decide that, we've tried the executive, we've tried the legislative, we've tried the judicial, we've tried nonprofits, we've tried all these things, and it's time to just stop the flow of oil. And we can talk about that more. But we were not allowed to bring the necessity defense in North Dakota. And I did go to prison. After my trial, I was sentenced almost exactly a year ago. It was February 6th. And I was sentenced. I was risking a possible 21 years. I was sentenced to 1 year and taken into custody, and I spent 6 months of that time serving in a North Dakota prison, and then I've been 6 months on parole, and I'll be 3 years on probation. The other valve turners did not go to prison or see jail time, but they, Leonard, who will be on, can tell you more, but he's on probation. And Ken in Washington State, he was tried twice because the first jury was hung. The first jury could not decide whether he was guilty or not.
What would you be accused guilty of damaging their equipment or something?
Yes. In my case, it was criminal mischief and conspiracy and trespass.
Uh-huh.
And I definitely did the trespass, no question about that. But then the question of criminal mischief and conspiracy depends on whether I intended to do damage, more than $10,000 worth of damage. The pipeline company pulled out a calculator on the stand and said simply that, it cost them 1 million that day and in lost potential revenue. The law, however, is not about potential revenue. It's about actual costs. Mm-hmm. And I still say to this day that I really didn't cost them a penny. All of that oil got to market.
Right.
And as effective as what we did became in terms of energizing, galvanizing, moving people to take things more seriously. And I got so many letters in prison from people who were not taking plane flights, who had decided to go car free, people who were really inspiring me because of their commitment, because I had turned off the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, as effective as that was, all the oil, the pipelines were all turned back on. And the real crime that day was when the employees opened up those valves and the president did nothing. And we are burning more tar sands today than we were 2 years ago.
It's unbelievable. I'd like to come back to the climate necessity defense because it's kind of like, I think, the most important axis about which you all were working. And I read quite fascinatingly that Dr. Anthony Ingrafia, is that how you pronounce his name?
Yes.
Who has authored the American Pipeline Institute Pipeline Safety Guidelines, would have testified. And when he was asked about this whole issue, he said that you all had acted out of concern for the communities that are harmed by fossil fuel pipelines and the climate emergency. And he himself said it can't be safe. There is no way this can ever be made safe.
Well, we've seen many pipeline accidents across the country, and they're pretty regular, pretty continuous. The company that was running the pipelines in Minnesota, where Emily and Annette shut off the valves to 2 pipelines, that's Enbridge, and they have more than a spill a day.
Good Lord. What were the 5 states again? It was North Dakota, you said?
North Dakota, Minnesota, Montana, and Washington State. Mm-hmm. And the Minnesota trial was where Anthony was going to testify, and along with James Hansen and other experts.
Right.
And Emily and Annette were ready to take the stand. We had just come back from lunch, and the defense was ready to present their case, and they presented a motion when the prosecution rested that said, we don't believe that the prosecution has proved their case, that any reasonable jury would not be able to find these people guilty based on the evidence or the lack of it. And the judge agreed. And the case stopped. The trial ended right there. We had experts ready to testify, and it would have been a beautiful case. But
and that was that. It's
they were set free.
People always go, "Oh, isn't it great? You're free." And then you go, "Well, yeah, really." But we wanted to get our argument into the legal records.
It is something that needs to happen in the United States. We need to see cases where somebody can go to trial and argue that what they did was necessary to protect the commons,
right.
Basically,
right?
Whatever that commons is, and say that this is necessary because these corporations are killing us, and their business model depends on wiping out the civilization that they are profiting off of. And that sounds so evil and psychopathic. And like, how could anybody be that evil to, try and make money off of destroying life on Earth? But a corporation is a person. A corporation has super rights. And a corporation has no moral code or conscience. It cannot. It only has one purpose, and that is to serve the shareholders more profits. So as ridiculous and, conspiracy-minded as I sound sometimes, the corporations are simply doing what they were set up to do under our system of laws. So our system of laws needs to recognize that people have the right to defend themselves against the deadly actions that, let's face it, there are no brakes on this thing.
Right.
There are just no brakes on this
Right.
thing. We're careening over the cliff, and there are no brakes. So we keep looking around expecting a leader or a movement or somebody to stand up and stop us from poisoning ourselves. But everything in our society is designed for us to poison ourselves.
It seems, though, from my years in activism, and there was this big rush in the 80s and 90s, to be global and national, and everybody was focused as activists in these big ways. It's really time to return to local, for all of us in all of our communities. And where are our governors? They have the power to stop anything the federal government does or doesn't want to do, anytime, any day.
There you go. They have a lot of authority, and here in Washington State, where I live, we have a governor who's considering a run for the presidency on climate. Mm-hmm. Governor Jay Inslee wrote a book on, solar power and shifting our energy grid, and he is definitely the climate governor, and emissions are still climbing. So the idea that, he's been here 6 years as governor, and we haven't seen him come out against any major fossil fuel project in a big way. He's tried a few things administratively, but he's not doing. He's the greatest speaker on climate you could ever want to hear.
That's wonderful.
Like hearing Obama speak on
Right.
climate. It's beautiful, but the actions simply don't support the words. And at a time when we're hearing all about the Green New Deal, when we're hearing about the IPCC telling us, that in 12 years we need to be off of fossil fuels. We got to start yesterday if we're going to make this happen. He's putting forward proposals that talk about 2035, 2045, and it's kind of tone deaf.
Yeah.
There's no sense of the current emergency in any of the policies being put forward.
And so when you and other activists, this was coordinated with Standing Rock and all the efforts of so many thousands of people from so many different parts of the nation and world even. Where do you see things in terms of people in the listening audience or people who download this podcast and they go, well, what can I do?
Oh boy. Okay. I'm gonna start with kind of that local thing that you were talking about.
Okay.
And I'm gonna leave it to Leonard to talk more about movements and organizing and stuff, because quite frankly, I'm feeling pretty burnt.
Yeah, I would think so.
At this particular moment. And I can talk a little bit more about that too. But
I think
vocally,
it's
what
go ahead.
can people do? Number one, I've had this conversation or debate or argument with everybody in the movement, other valve turners, you name it, whether what one person does and personal habits matter. And I've come to the moment where, look, I know one person's behavior cannot stop slavery, right? Or human trafficking or whatever it is. But I refuse to participate anymore. Mm-hmm. I can't do it. I can't live with myself, my family tree, my understanding of the science and where we're headed and the moment I stand in right now. The potential for you and I to stop what's happening is incredible. The potential for us to make life possible for the next 10,000 years. That's a very real scientific, mathematical given. That's what our job. That's why we're here, as far as I can see it.
Yeah.
So how could I continue pursuing, political strategies or social strategies for change that may or may not pay off, but certainly haven't paid off to this point. And continue getting on airplanes. Continue driving a car if there's any way at all for me to live car-free. Continue to eat meat if I can be vegan. So all of these things, and here's the other reason why all of these things do matter, is because if corporations run the world, if dinosaurs ruled the world, if corporations rule the world, we are the customers. We are the customers, and the only thing they respond to is money and the bottom line and whether they're selling things. Today's the Super Bowl, and if you looked at any of the Super Bowl ads, there's nothing there. Every industry, soda pops and trucks and whatever it is, every industry that's advertising for millions of dollars for a second on the air, they're selling stuff that if we don't buy it, our kids will actually live longer. That's obvious with something like a soda pop. But the idea that, not buying the truck, not buying the soda pop means that the carbon footprint of that company gets a little smaller and we start to have an impact. So to me, it's about walking the talk and sharing that message, talking to people. I am a social creature. We all are. We move like a school of fish. And, who leads a school of fish? Nobody. No one person. The school responds and turns and moves in milliseconds. 1,000 fish can change direction 7 times in a few seconds. So I feel like we can do that as social creatures if we just live our lives, share our messages, and show each other how to live in a way that our children can survive, and demand it of our leaders, and demand it of the companies we do business with. But number one, I would just say stop doing business with most of these companies. I have simplified my life to the point it's kind of ridiculous. Going to prison was wonderful for me.
In what ways?
Because I was trying to simplify my life.
Uh-huh.
And
that'll give you enough of a monastic experience.
I was going to say, when you're locked up for 20 hours a day in a cell, it's easy to simplify.
Yeah. No, well, I assume your next book will be fascinating.
My take on prison, though, I do need to say, prisons are stupid. They are a bad idea, a waste of time.
Yeah.
What I saw in North Dakota was probably some of the better prisons in the country. And I swear to you, if we just sentenced people and then turned them loose instead, I think our society would be gentler, would be more compassionate and humane, because the prisoners would not be so scarred and broken.
Of course.
The people who come through that system are worse when they are turned loose in society than the day they go in.
No question about it.
So there's nothing, really wonderful or humanizing that happens to a person in prison. It's just a dumb idea. And if it wasn't for Jim Crow, if it wasn't for a need to, continue slavery, if it wasn't for the fake crack epidemic in the 80s and
the drug war,
expansion of, private prisons around the country, if it wasn't about all that, if we weren't the most imprisoned land of the free in the world, then we would look at prisons as a really dumb idea. So anyway, I needed to say that.
No, I'm glad you do. I've spent a lot of airtime over the last 30-some years talking about the drug war and this disgraceful civil war of the federal government against the citizens of the states, and how many millions and millions of people's lives and families have been destroyed over what? A constitutional prerogative to do to their body what they choose to do. I'm sorry.
I had no numbers, but what I saw was people who were going back through the system 2 or 3 or 4 times, often because they were violating a condition of their parole or probation. They'd fail a drug test, or they wouldn't show up for a drug test because they knew they would fail it, and so then they're not showing up for a test, so they get picked up and hauled off to jail.
Exactly.
It was insane. It was nuts.
It is insane, and it is an industry, and it grew by leaps and bounds, and states discovered they could profit by becoming prisons. And after they called the cities of all the black men, then they went to the counties, and now they've called all the people from the trailer parks. I mean, the whole thing is so perverted. Look, we don't have a lot of time. We're almost out of time. What would you like to say in closing before we're joined by your colleague?
In some ways, as a privileged white older male, I felt better in prison than I have since I got out.
Wow.
We are not a free country. We just aren't. We are free to poison ourselves. We are free to distract ourselves a million ways every second. We are being force-fed a grotesque diet of corporate propaganda all day long. It was so nice to not have internet, to not have a cell phone or email, to be offline for 6 months. I mean, some people pay good money for that. To get away to a retreat center. And I had that experience. And coming out, I have just felt so bombarded by our grotesque, poisonous culture. And we don't need any of it. We can be the ones who protect our family tree, who defend life on Earth. But we have to act now, and we have to stop buying this message.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really well summarized. Every time we try in a short space of airtime to digest these enormous global realities that the mainstream media doesn't really speak to at all. They're just totally distracted in the cult of the personality. It drives me out of my mind sometimes to think, how can we get this out so that people understand how dire a situation we really are in worldwide?
Right. Well, people can not get on a plane and not eat meat, go vegan, and live car-free. And those are the three biggies, but there's a ton of other things people can do. And then tell your neighbors, tell your family, share it with them in a loving way. Hey, let's leave a great green world for our kids.
Amen.
Because right now, we are every beer commercial in the Super Bowl, we are drinking their future away.
Yeah, it's
really
very true. Well, I look forward to talking with Leonard, who I've not met before, and talk about the Extinction Rebellion, because I just think it's so wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us, Michael. Thank you for your service to the world and your willingness to have yourself imprisoned to really make a stand. Not too many people will do that.
Thank you.